In a nation of immigrants, folk music has many faces. In America, the musics of the world met, crossed and recrossed, intertwined, created new strands. In traditional communities, Indian villages, frontier towns, immigrant neighborhoods in the hearts of big cities, songs, instruments, and melodies were passed from generation to generation. Songs and tunes were carried back and forth across the continent by restless travelers. Eventually, they were broadcast by phonograph and radio. Every American has benefited from that interchange. America has only one indigenous folk music, the music of the American Indian. As varied as the hundreds of different North American tribes and languages, this music was old before the first European explorers crossed the ocean. There are ancient Indian ceremonial songs to accompany all occasions and activities. Songs for birth, marriage, burial, songs to cure the ill, lullabies, all sung only by the worthiest of singers. Though different in each tribe, the ceremonial songs have remained unchanged for centuries.
The song of the green rainbow. A green rainbow was moving toward me, so here I was dancing under the rainbow and making the rain wet the whole earth.
Songs of special occasion, some based on dreams or visions, are still created by individual Indian singers from Alaska to Arizona. Rhythm instruments are basic. Drums of all sorts made from logs, skins, or earthenware. Rattles made from turtle shells or gourds. Shakers with bone, shells, nuts, and bells. Hunting bows are played as one might play a one-string bass guitar. Mouth bows are held against the cheek and plucked to create rhythm and melody. Flutes of amazing variety and craftsmanship are made of hollowed bone, carved wood or silver, and modified, decorated, and individualized by each player. These are the sounds that were heard by the first English settlers when they began colonizing the eastern seaboard in the 1600s, bringing with them their fiddles, hymn books, and ancient ballads. Unaccompanied singing was the heart of the British tradition. In Puritan New England, psalm singing flourished. Evangelical preachers from New England carried the hymns to the frontier and into the southern colonies. Baptist hymns, sung in the spare, high southern manner, took root. Classic British ballads, some dating from medieval times, were sung throughout the colonies, the old stories never failing to charm or chasten succeeding generations.
All in the merry month of May, when the green buds they were swelling, young William Green on his deathbed lay, for the love of Barbary Ellen.
In the colonies, these ancient songs rubbed shoulders with new topical broadsheet ballads, composed to chronicle or protest the events of the day, sold in the streets as they had been in England. The settlers' favorite instrument, the fiddle, was used to accompany the old European dances, and new ones like the Virginia reel. While such frivolity was often frowned upon in Puritan New England, many of the British contra dances, jigs, and reels survive to this day, relatively unchanged. New England has always remained closest to the Old English tradition, and British-style accordion, concertina, and piano still accompany ballads and dances. The English ballad tradition is still an important part of American folk music throughout the country. In the South, the fiddle tradition changed and flourished, influenced greatly by the rhythmic music of black slaves, and laid the basis for later styles, such as bluegrass and country and western. British ballads and colonial songs moved across the continent with land-hungry settlers, there to mingle with new sounds and to change with the needs of homesteaders, miners, and cowboys. From Ireland came some of the liveliest fiddle tunes and some of the most beautiful ballads to cross the ocean. Successive waves of migration have kept alive the original traditions in many Irish communities throughout the United States, where rebel songs and ballads can still be heard to the muffled beat of the bodhrán and the lilting sounds of the Irish pipes. The more strident war pipes came with the Scottish and are sometimes taken up by venturesome young Americans today. The strength of British influence on American music was matched only by the impact of the music brought by black slaves from Africa. The interweaving of European and African musical styles was perhaps the most significant factor in the history of American music. In the South particularly, the music of black and white working people crossed and recrossed. The slaves and their descendants contributed a fluid and expressive vocal style and a highly developed sense of rhythm to European songs and instruments. A new Afro-American music was created. The slaves introduced the forerunner of the banjo, which was soon adopted by white settlers. On the plantations, the slaves created work songs, field hollers, ballads, and spirituals. Later, these evolved into gospel songs and the blues. Which laid the basis for ragtime, jazz, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll. Jazz had its birth in New Orleans, a crossroads of musical cultures. There, black and British musical traditions encountered an even earlier European influence, the elegant ballroom music of France. The most distinctive French music came to the bayou country of Louisiana with the Acadians, or Cajuns, in the mid-18th century. The Cajuns had been expelled from their French-Canadian home by the new British rulers of Canada, a story immortalized in the poem Evangeline. In the Louisiana bayou, they have kept alive a unique and ancient music and their own special French dialect. To the old sinuous fiddling of waltzes and two-steps. The Cajuns have adopted accordions, guitars, and triangles. With one ear open to white country music and another to the blues, they created a highly distinctive sound, infectious and haunting. The bayous are also the home of Zydeco music, a mixture of black and Cajun styles, played by black French-speaking Creole musicians. The French have also left their mark along the Canadian-American border. French-Canadian dance music is a mixture of the highly ornamented French and Irish fiddle traditions. French-Canadian bands with fiddle, piano, and accordion can be found in northern Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as in Oregon and Washington. In the western states, another strain of European music preceded the British into America, the music of Spain. The instrument most widely used in almost all forms of American folk music, the guitar, came into the United States from Mexico in the late 19th century. Throughout the Southwest and along the Mexican border, accordion bands played tunes that come from a combination of the Spanish and Mexican Indian heritage. Chicanos sing corridos. Like broadside ballads, they tell of topical events and heroic legends. Also popular are the big, more sophisticated Mexican-style mariachi bands. Guitars, accordions, and Spanish melodies have also flourished on the island of Puerto Rico and in the homes of the 1.5 million Puerto Ricans now living on the United States mainland. Influenced by black music in the Caribbean and in the northern cities, Puerto Rican music is very rhythmic and uses many percussion instruments. Puerto Rico, like the United States, has an important ballad tradition. The decima singing of the Jibaro of Puerto Rico's central mountains has also been the basis of much contemporary Puerto Rican folk and protest music. The popular salsa music has its roots in native Puerto Rican folk music. Along with the Puerto Rican salsa, northern cities have absorbed much West Indian folk and folk-based music. Calypso from Trinidad, reggae from Jamaica, the steel drum sound from the Bahamas. A melting pot or a nation of diverse immigrant groups? The United States has been called both, and its folk culture has reflected both aspects. Some of the musical sounds and instruments brought from all corners of the world have influenced the overall sound. Others have remained isolated in small communities. The Germans, Poles, and Austrians brought the accordions which became part of so many different musical styles. They also brought that quintessential folk instrument, the harmonica, and made the polka a part of the American scene. And Italian folk music is heard in hundreds of Italian communities throughout the United States. The Italians brought the mandolin, now used by every bluegrass band. Greeks brought the traditional bouzouki music, as well as goatskin bagpipes, to accompany their native dances. Jews brought Yiddish songs and cantorial melodies from Europe, with the ecstatic chants of the Hasidic rabbis and the new folk songs of Israel. The Portuguese brought the fado songs, still sung in the fishing communities of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. The Chinese, who helped build the transcontinental railroads, brought ancient sounds that are still heard at Chinatown celebrations. Hawaiians brought the unique steel guitars that had a lasting effect on blues, country, and Cajun music. And there are many more international musical traditions that survive and have become part of the folk music of this nation of immigrants. All these varied and colorful strains combined to create a multitude of folk and popular musics. They contributed to the development of jazz, one of America's most unique and highly developed arts, and influenced the writing of American classical composers. They have inspired generations of young people to seek out and relearn the old songs and styles, and to create a new music, drawing on those styles.
I wanna hop on the last train in the station.
Today there are thousands of folk festivals and gatherings throughout the nation each year. America's folk music has its roots in faraway times and places. But as its people live, work, and struggle, its folk music is reborn every day.
Sometimes better low than law. Sometimes go from marriage. Sometimes it's mother-in-law. Sometimes.
a poor wayfaring stranger wandering through this world.
This is the sound of country music. And this is the sound of country music.
I hear the train a-comin', it's rolling around a bend.
And this, too, is the sound of country music.
I don't know when.
Country music's roots are sunk deep in southern soil. Country music dates from the time when the first settlers from the British Isles came to America's shores, bringing with them few musical instruments, but a great heritage of ballads and songs.
In Carolina lived a lady. She was most handsome and gay.
When Dillard Chandler of Skyland, North Carolina, sings The Carolina Lady, he's singing a transplanted version of the ballad Lady of Carlisle, a song which has its roots in European classical poetry.
To loving brothers. And
Settlers in the South developed a distinctive way of singing the old songs, a high, eerie sound that seems to reflect the wide and lonesome vistas of the New World. The old ballads were almost always sung alone and unaccompanied. Only in church did isolated backwoods people come together to sing. Most of the hymns were sung in unison, the whole congregation singing the same melody as the minister lined out the verses.
that saved a wretch like me.
Harmony singing didn't become popular in Southern churches until the 19th century, when evangelical Yankee singing schoolmasters brought the sacred harp singing style to rural areas. Sacred harp hymn books used different shaped musical notes to make it easier for people who couldn't read music to learn the harmony parts. Just about the only instrument brought by the earliest settlers from the British Isles was the fiddle, which was sometimes used to accompany the old ballads.
We've met, and to know true love. We've met.
But mostly it was used for dancing. The fiddlers brought a vast repertoire of British, Scottish, and Irish dance tunes, many of which are still played today. And they created new tunes and gave them American names, like Cripple Creek. A southern fiddle style developed, loose, rough, and highly rhythmic. In the folk music of the South, melody was of prime importance, not chords or harmony. Many of these melodies did not use all 7 notes of the familiar musical scale. They had a spare, open, compelling sound that seems to fit the rugged environment in which they were sung.
When sorrows encompass me round.
When the melody was accompanied at all, it was usually by a simple one-note drone. On the fiddle, this was accomplished by playing 2 strings at once, a technique called double stopping. Fiddlers would sometimes retune their instruments to make it easier to get that sound. Another ancient instrument found in the South that made good use of the drone was the dulcimer, a 3-stringed instrument of Germanic origin, often fretted with a twig and plucked with a goose quill. The melody was played on 1 string, the other strings sounding as drones. The banjo, destined to become enormously popular with country musicians, was created by black slaves in the South, modeled after instruments played in Africa. In the early 19th century, a 5th string was added halfway up the banjo neck, which could be played as a high drone. This made the banjo a more congenial instrument to country musicians, who liked the high, ringing sound it produced. Though the banjo is usually strummed or plucked with the fingers, some mountain musicians adopted a unique method of playing melody with the back of the fingernails. They used this claw hammer style to play many of the old fiddle tunes. When the local fiddler and banjo player got together, a wild, exciting dance music was the result.
Police come, I didn't want to go this morning. Police come, I didn't want to go this morning.
The guitar was a latecomer to country music, coming into the South in the late 19th century from Mexico. At first, it was used primarily as bass and rhythm backing for other instruments, introducing more conventional chords and harmony. Guitar, fiddle, and banjo were the makings of the first Southern string bands. Other instruments popular in the South were the harmonica, the auto harp, and various simple percussion instruments like spoons, Jew's harps, the mouth bow, and straws beating time on the fiddle neck. Music for dancing was an essential ingredient of communal activities like corn huskings, quilting bees, tobacco curings, apple stringings, log rollings, wood choppings.
Hands up and circle to the left. Break and swing. Promenade.
Music served other important functions too. The old ballads were the storybooks, radio, and television of backwoods life. Newer songs told the stories of local events, famous happenings, legendary heroes and outlaws. Some songs detailed the ups and downs of farming and rural life.
I worked all the fall, and then I spent my Christmas in a pair of overalls. They ain't a thing for a poor man in this world. Lord have mercy.
There were sentimental songs and songs about love.
There I loved a pretty little woman, but her age I did not know.
And hundreds of songs about the railroad, which, starting in the 19th century, increasingly broke down the isolation of rural communities and held out hopes to many of adventure and freedom.
She ought to be in town, and I saw the train come down, and I heard the whistle blow 900 miles.
In the early 1900s, southern rural communities became even less isolated as a result of encroaching industrialization, along with major social and technological changes. The nationwide craze for the radio spread to many backwoods areas in the 1920s and 30s. The radio brought commercial popular music from northern cities. But it also made it possible for country musicians to broadcast throughout the South by way of the national barn dances. An even more important innovation was the phonograph. When it first became popular in the South, country people could buy records only of northern entertainers. Then in 1923, Ralph Peer, recording director for OK Records, recorded old-time fiddler, house painter, political campaigner, and moonshiner, Fiddlin' John Carson, playing The Little Old Log Cabin in the Lane. The unprecedented success of the record in rural areas launched the hillbilly recording industry.
But the only friend that's left there is that good old dog of mine, and the little old log cabin in the lane.
Much of the country music recorded in the 20s and 30s was virtually identical to the folk music of the South, and it is due in part to these old discs that many of these tunes are still alive today. But commercial recordings also took country music out of the people's hands, making them consumers rather than creators. Buell Kazee, who sang the old mountain ballads, was one of those who recorded during the golden age of country music.
She went upstairs to make her
bed, and not one word to a mother said.
The Carter family, who sang the old ballads in a more conventional, accessible fashion, became enormously popular. The Carters also sang religious tunes, original songs, and popular and sentimental ballads. Their harmony singing and Maybelle Carter's lead guitar work had great influence on future styles of country music.
In this wide and wicked world that never met.
Uncle Dave Macon, a very colorful performer, sang everything from traditional folk songs to political satire to medicine show novelty songs, and was the first big star of the Grand Ole Opry.
What your mammy told you 6 months ago, keep on your coat and hat, be ready to go.
Charlie Poole and his North Carolina Ramblers were only one of the many popular string bands of the era that featured fiddle, guitar, and banjo, and combined the old dance tunes with the latest from Tin Pan Alley.
One Tuesday morning and it looked like a rain around the curve, come a paying the train. On the blind said old Bill Jones, good old hobo and it's time to get home. He fought Texas.
The most popular country singing star of all was the singing brakeman, Jimmie Rodgers. Jimmie was one of a long line of country musicians, influenced by Southern black music. His combination of blues with a unique high-pitched yodel earned him the name Blue Yodeler. Though originally from Mississippi, Jimmie Rodgers spent many years in Texas. And his association with the West led to the increasing popularity of Western and cowboy music in the 1930s. Authentic cowboy music was not unlike the folk music of the Southeast, rugged and traditional, often sung unaccompanied.
As I rode down to Tom Sherman's barroom, one morning in May.
Some cowboy songs, like Tom Sherman's Barroom, had descended from Old English ballads. But by the mid-30s, singing movie stars, like Gene Autry and the Sons of the Pioneers, had popularized a syrupy Western music that was a far cry from Tom Sherman's Barroom. One fascinating hybrid that grew out of the Western craze was Western swing, a combination of traditional country music, the popular jazz music of the 30s, and the Spanish music of the Mexican border.
Take me back to Tulsa, I'm too young to marry. Take me back to Tulsa, I'm too young to marry.
The banjo was heard less during this period, as two other traditional instruments became popular: the mandolin and the steel guitar, or dobro, which was played on the lap, Hawaiian style, with a metal bar sliding along the strings. The early years of country music recording were years of drought and of the Great Depression. Many country people were driven off their farms to become migrants looking for work, but often ending up on the breadlines in the cities. Country musicians saw commercial success as a way to escape the grinding poverty, and in the attempt to keep up with the latest fads, traditional music was often forgotten. The Depression's general disruption of rural life also contributed to the decline of traditional music in the South. Woody Guthrie was one of those who turned to protest, singing militant songs for those hardest hit by the Depression.
I'm blowing down this road, dusty road. I'm a-blowing down this old dusty road. I'm a-blowing down this old dusty road, Lord, Lord, and I ain't a-going to be treated this way.
This song was composed by Aunt Molly Jackson in 1931, 2 weeks after I started on my tour collecting finance for the miners' children.
Aunt Molly Jackson was another protester. She was driven from her native Kentucky as an agitator.
I love coal miners, I do. I love coal miners, I do. I've lived among them all their lives, and their wives I dearly love a coal mining man.
The Second World War marked the end of the Depression, but it further disrupted rural life. Southerners continued to move off the farms, some going into the service, others moving to the cities to work in defense plants, and they brought country music with them. The war spread country music throughout the United States and paved the way for a national country music industry. A brand new style finally replaced the pervasive popularity of cowboy songs. Honky-tonk music fostered in the nightlife of a new, more urban environment. Songs about truck driving, dance halls, and jukeboxes.
Put a nickel in the jukebox and let that record spin.
One big change in the music was the introduction of electric instruments, string bass, and drums to keep pace with the noise of jukeboxes and taverns. The steel guitar began to evolve into a unique, highly sophisticated instrument capable of a wide range of evocative sounds.
Well, I left my home down on the rural route. I told my pa I'm going stepping out and get the honky-tonk blues.
The greatest honky-tonk singer of all was Hank Williams, who sang in a voice that rang with the high, lonesome sound of the mountains. In the early 50s, Williams's songs broke into the top 10, and for the first time, Southern musicians began to aspire to nationwide pop audiences. As country and Western music, as it was now called, was becoming a multi-million-dollar pop industry with Nashville as its center, other musicians carried on and developed the older traditional folk styles. In the 40s, the great singer and mandolin player Bill Monroe began to develop a new style, based on the old string band instrumentation, traditional songs, church harmony, and acoustic instruments, but more high-powered and jazz-influenced. This music was called bluegrass. For Monroe's band, the Bluegrass Boys. And it became really popular when a young banjo player named Earl Scruggs joined the Bluegrass Boys, bringing with him a rapid-fire finger-picking technique that almost immediately revived the popularity of the instrument. In the 50s, the national success of Hank Williams led country musicians into previously uncharted areas of American popular music. Rock and roll was basically a combination of country and Western music and rhythm and blues, and a country boy, Elvis Presley, was its biggest star. But other country singers have returned country and Western music to a more traditional base. Merle Haggard, for instance, still sings the songs of Jimmy Rogers.
Well, I'm going to California, where they sleep out every night. Yeah. I'm going to California, where they sleep out every night.
The urban folk revival of the 60s and 70s led to much research into grassroots country music and to the appearance of many great old-time musicians at northern folk clubs and festivals. Young Southerners have found a new pride in down-home music. Fiddles, guitars, and banjos are picked up once again.
Three steaks when I'm hungry, whiskey when I'm dry, greenbacks when I'm horny, sweet heaven when I die.
The story of black folk music in America begins on the west coast of Africa. From there, thousands of black men and women were forcibly transported to provide free labor for the white settlers of the new land across the Atlantic. Stripped of material possessions, those slaves who survived the journey to America brought with them a great musical heritage. In Africa, there had been a song for every occasion, and group singing and chanting were an important part of daily and ceremonial life. In America, the African vocal tradition was adapted to the needs of life and survival. Work songs provided the rhythm, pace, and spirit that made long, back-breaking work in the plantation fields a little more bearable. The sound can still be heard in the singing of Southern chain gangs, as gang leaders call out imaginative, improvised lyrics, and gang members answer back in a call and response pattern common to African chants. In America, work songs took on a heavier beat, sparer harmony. They were stripped to the essentials of hard work under the lash. On the plantations, lone field hands called back and forth with long African-style hollers that may have been the forerunner of the blues songs of today.
Yesterday, Lord, I get lucky, oh, yesterday I go.
In the Atlantic Sea Islands off the Georgia and South Carolina coasts, isolated from the southern mainland, much of the old African-based slave music is still alive. Soon after the African slaves landed in America, their new masters began to convert them to Christianity. Blacks thus learned the great Protestant hymns of the colonies. But they sang them in their own style, with elaborate rhythm, group improvisation, fervent emotion.
I am a motherless child.
Years of oppression found expression in the powerful music we call spirituals. In the Sea Islands, this music, too, is very much alive.
Lord, I've been in a storm so long.
African rhythm is incredibly complex. Percussion instruments, including many different kinds of drums, are the most widely used. Rhythm is laid upon rhythm, each percussion instrument adding a new dimension. Slaves made their own entertainment dancing to African drums. When drums were outlawed after the first slave rebellions, because they had been used to send signals from one plantation to another, the slaves used skillets, kettles, and jawbones for percussion. When no instruments at all were to be had, they danced to juba chants, rhythmically sung, improvised lyrics, accompanied by hand clapping and body slapping. Gradually, blacks took up the most common and popular instrument of the white settlers, the fiddle. Black fiddlers played for white dances, where they learned the European waltzes and cotillions, the Virginia reels and square dance tunes. And they played at slave gatherings, where African, European, and American steps were mixed together. When real fiddles were not available, they were improvised. The fiddle was not that unfamiliar. The slaves introduced another stringed instrument that had its origins in Africa. Played with the fingers rather than with a bow, it was the forerunner of the banjo. Banjos were improvised from buckets and pans with horsehair strings. Fiddle and banjo remained the most popular folk instruments among black Americans until the late 19th century, when guitars first became available. Various kinds of wind instruments were also common in Africa. In America, such instruments were improvised from quills, canes, and animal horns. The sound of the African flute can still be heard in the playing of Mississippi fife and drum bands. After the Civil War, most of the freed slaves, in common with poor whites in the impoverished South, found themselves working as sharecroppers for wealthy landowners. Times were bad, and blacks were persecuted ruthlessly, but music remained a source of pride, and new musical instruments became available. Itinerant musicians roamed the southern countryside, trying to eke out a living with their music. To essentially European instruments and melodies, the black musicians supplied all the elements of Afro-American music: a heavy beat, intricate rhythms, vocal-sounding slurs, slides, and bends. In the late 19th century, guitars became available, and they were immediately popular among black musicians, eventually replacing the fiddle almost entirely. Black musicians developed an elaborate syncopated interplay between the thumb and the forefinger that picked the strings. The fluid finger picking of Elizabeth Cotten gives some idea of what early black guitar playing sounded like. Even before the Civil War, black music in one form or another had become known throughout the United States. Northern song publishers had printed books of black spirituals, and abolitionists distributed them widely. So-called coon songs were published, imitating black secular music, and it became fashionable for white musicians to appear in blackface. Though the minstrel shows exploited black music in a crude and often vicious fashion, they also provided a stage for many great authentic black musicians. As black composers began to get musical works published, a group of black pianists, mostly from Missouri, were writing syncopated parlor-type pieces called rags. Scott Joplin is the best-known ragtime composer. Ragtime became a national craze among blacks and whites in the 1890s, along with the cakewalk, originally a plantation slave dance. Ragtime music was influenced by, and in turn influenced, the syncopated playing of black string bands and black jug bands. Around the turn of the century, a new type of black song began to be heard throughout the South. Whether slow and mournful, harsh and driving, or light and bawdy, these solo songs became known collectively as the blues.
I went to the graveyard and looked deep down in her face. Nana, I hear me talking, pretty mama, Lord. I went to the grave, I looked deep down in her face.
The blues songs have their own particular chord patterns, a 12-bar verse being the most common. They often have a 3-line lyric, in which the first line is repeated for emphasis.
Well, woman I'm loving, she's 6 feet in the play.
The words are personal, impressionistic, vivid, and highly symbolic.
I'm loving, she's 6 feet in the play.
The itinerant blues singer's favorite instrument was the guitar. Bluesmen used it to parallel and augment their singing, filling the pauses with the kind of improvisation that became the hallmark of jazz. In the early 1900s, Hawaiian musicians toured the United States, introducing their unique slide guitars. Black musicians found this style congenial to blues and gospel music. The open chord tunings allowed them to play a heavy, rhythmic drone, while a knife blade, sliding metal bar, or glass bottleneck fitted on one finger of the left hand played a fluid, vocal-sounding melody. The bottleneck blues of the Mississippi Delta is one of the most powerful and influential of Southern blues styles.
I'm looking funny in my eyes. I believe I'm fixing to die.
Black musicians also developed a unique way of playing the harmonica. The harmonica has two chords, one sounded by blowing, the other by inhaling. Blues musicians use the inhaled chord as the main chord to get a more fluid, wailing sound. Another popular blues instrument was the piano, available mostly in urban areas. There, the dance hall, barrel house, and boogie-woogie blues styles developed. The tradition of the spirituals was carried on by sacred singers in country churches and by itinerant gospel singers who, like the Reverend Gary Davis, sang and preached in the streets.
Hallelujah, hallelujah, I belong to the band, hallelujah.
Though the blues was often considered sinful by churchgoers, the two styles of music had much in common. Church was the great training ground for black singers. The 20th century saw a continuous migration of Southern blacks from rural areas to cities, and from the South to the North. By the 1920s, there were already large urban black populations throughout the country. Memphis, St. Louis, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Detroit, and Chicago had become blues centers. City blues was generally lighter and more polished than country blues.
Got a long, tall mama, she stands about 7 feet 9.
City blues was closely tied to the beginnings of jazz. Women were among the first blues singers to record, accompanied by sophisticated jazz musicians.
I love my brown skin, indeed I do. When it rains 5 days and the sky turns dark as night.
The most famous was Bessie Smith, whose popularity among both blacks and whites led to national interest in the blues. In the 1920s and 30s, talent scouts from northern record companies turned attention to the South. They recorded black and white musicians, paid next to nothing, and made fortunes selling to Southern audiences. White recordings were designated as hillbilly, black as race records. All kinds of regional, religious, and secular styles were recorded, but the blues proved most profitable, and other styles of black folk music were neglected as a result. During World War II, hundreds of thousands of blacks, the largest migration yet, moved north looking for work in war-related industry. They settled in crowded urban ghettos. By this time, electric guitars and bands with bass and drums had become common in bars, nightclubs, and roadhouses. Chicago, at the terminus of the Illinois Central Railroad, was the most easily accessible northern city for blacks from Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. After the war, it became the country's undisputed blues center.
Well, that's two trains running.
In the mid-40s, Mississippi-born Muddy Waters returned Chicago blues to its folk roots. Combining his Deep South vocal style with the power of electric instruments, he caught the restless, urgent feeling of Chicago's South Side ghetto. His band set the style of blues music for a decade to come. His harmonica players, blowing directly into a microphone attached to a guitar amplifier, created a highly sophisticated and powerful instrument capable of eerie and haunting sounds. The new urban blues styles have been carried on by leading jazz-influenced blues musicians.
The thrill is gone. The thrill is gone.
The driving rhythm and blues of the early 50s was the inspiration for rock and roll. While blues and jazz were remaking pop music, traditional spiritual and gospel songs were still being sung in black churches throughout the land.
There's always somebody talking about me, but really I don't mind.
Many of today's popular rhythm and blues musicians learned to play and sing in the church.
Getting the spirit in the dark.
In the 60s, when blacks throughout the country demonstrated for equality and civil rights, the old gospel hymns were sung in the streets, with new words added to fit the changing times. Today, creative black musicians have fused pop, jazz, and rock styles. But the base of the music is still the African rhythm, the gospel, and the blues.
People keep on learning.
The folk music movement of the last 2 decades has brought many great traditional black musicians to the festivals and concert halls.
You go to
Awakening black consciousness has led to a renewed interest in all styles of African and Afro-American music. Young black musicians have learned and kept alive the old styles.
Yeah, now I know a fool. He came way down south. Call him Charlie Stone.
Well, little red hen said to little red rooster, you don't come round here much as you used to. Now, honey, you long gone.
And combined them with new sounds and ideas.
You long gone. Oh, you long gone. Think I can take it pretty gone.
And today, the sound of Africa is alive throughout America.
As long as the sun shall glow, as long as the wind shall blow, as long as the stream shall flow, as long as the grass shall grow, this land shall be
The first of the myriad songs of American history was the Indian song. Sometimes muted, sometimes drowned out. Today it is being heard again. The Pinta leads the procession, and her crew is singing the Te Deum. The crews of the Santa Maria and the Nina now join in the solemn chant, and many of the rough sailors must brush tears from their eyes. Christopher Columbus wrote these words in his journal of October 12, 1492, as his 3 Spanish ships landed in the Americas. More than a century later, English settlers landed at Plymouth. One of the cherished books aboard the Mayflower was the Ainsworth Psalter, a book of psalms. The first book printed in North America was the Bay Psalm Book, published in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1640. The colonists also sang about what was happening in the colonies and in the home country. Broadsides carried current stories set to the tunes of well-known ballads.
Oh, my name was William Kidd as I sailed, as I sailed. My name was William Kidd as I sailed. My name was William Kidd, God's laws I did forbid, and most wickedly I did as I sailed, as I sailed.
Captain Kidd was a privateer from New York, paid to attack pirates preying on British colonial shipping. But when he began attacking French traders, official and popular sentiment turned against him. In the 1750s, the British and their colonies were at war with the French and their Indian allies over possession of Canada. A British army surgeon satirized the war to the tune of an old Dutch folk song.
If Yankees you would have a song, a deuced nation fine one, and in a chorus all along, I guess you'd like to join one. The Yankee Doodle and all pass around the chorus handy. For some can sing and some can bawl, Yankee Doodle dandy.
He didn't know that his song would soon become a revolutionary battle cry. Colonists at the time were already singing of their discontent.
What a court hath old England of folly and sin, spite of Chatham and Camden, Borough, Burke, Wilkes and Glen. Not content with the Game Act, they taxed fish and sea, and America drenched with hot water and tea. Derry down, 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 Derry down.
In 1773, colonists dumped tea in Boston Harbor, and 2 years later, discontent became full-scale rebellion. Hymn writer William Billings penned a marching song, sung from Maine to Georgia.
Let tyrants shake their iron rod, and slavery clang her galling chains. We'll fear them not, we trust in God. New England's God forever reigns.
Popular ballads like The Rifleman of Bennington told of revolutionary victories.
Why come you hither, red coat your mind? What madness fills in our valleys? There's danger, and there's danger on our hills. There you'll meet our mountain boys with their leader, Johnny Stark, lads who make but a little noise, but who always hit the mark. Oh, the rifle, in our hands will prove no trifle.
The surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown was accompanied by music. Colonial fife and drummers trilled Yankee Doodle. The British appropriately played a popular folk tune, The World Turned Upside Down. Freedom from British rule did not mean freedom for all the inhabitants of the new country. We don't know what songs of anger, misery, or rebellion Africans may have sung in the holds of slave ships. But a powerful old ballad tells the story of an Irish seaman aboard the Baltimore slaver Flying Cloud.
Soon we reached Bermuda's Isle, where I met with Captain Moore, the commander of the Flying Cloud from out of Baltimore. He asked me if I'd ship with him a slaving voyage to go to the burning shores of Africa, where the sugar cane does grow. 'Twas after some weeks of sailing we arrived off Africa's shore. 500 of them are poor slaves, me boys, from their native land we bore. We marched them up on a plank, and we stowed them down below. Scarce 18 inches to a man was all they had to go. The plague and the fever, it came on board, it swept half of them away. We dragged their bodies up on deck and we hove them in the sea. It were better for the rest of them if they had died below than to work beneath the cruel planters in Cuba forevermore.
Other Americans also suffered as the new nation expanded. The opening of the frontier often meant the massacre of the Indian inhabitants. Daniel Boone blazed the wilderness road through the Cumberland Gap in 1775, the first crossing through the Allegheny Mountains, and was commemorated as an Indian fighter.
Oh, lay down, boys, take a little nap, I'll raise hell in the Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, Cumberland Gap, away down yonder in the Cumberland Gap. Oh, Daniel Boone on the Pinnacle Rock killed the Injuns with an old flintlock, Cumberland Gap, way down yonder in the Cumberland Gap.
In 1812, the United States was again at war with England, this time over control of the seas and the Western territories. Many songs were written about that war, but the best was written 150 years later to the traditional fiddle tune, 8th of January.
In 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we fought the bloody British at the town of New Orleans. We fired our guns and the British kept a-coming. There wasn't quite as many as there was a while ago. We fired once more and they began to run in down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico.
The United States emerged from the war with a national anthem. Francis Scott Key wrote it as he watched the British bombardment of Baltimore on September 14, 1814, to the tune of a popular drinking song called To Anacreon in Heaven. Sea shanties flourished with the mercantile trade that grew after the peace between England, France, and America in 1815. Rollicking, bawdy, sometimes beautiful, their purpose was to pace and ease the strain of often brutal work.
General Taylor gained the day. Walk him along, John, carry him along. Oh, General Taylor gained the day.
Carry him to his burying ground. Wave stormy. Walk him along, John, carry him along. Wave stormy. Carry him to his burying ground.
Oh, General Taylor died long ago.
Whaling voyages were among the longest, the most cruel, and the most profitable for ship owners.
It was in the year of 44, on March the 2nd day, that our gallant ship, her anchors waiting for Greenland, sailed away, brave boys, and for Greenland sailed away. We struck the whale, and away he went, and he gave a plunder with his tail, and we lost our boat and 5 brave men, and we never got that whale, brave boys, and we never got that whale.
There were songs of the beautiful clipper ships that carried cargo and passengers from east coast to west.
Around Cape Horn we all must go, way Susie, and around Cape Horn to Mexico, around the bays of Mexico.
And songs of the flatboats, steamers, and packets gliding along the inland waterways.
Oh, Shenandoah, I'm bound to see you, away you rolling river. Oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter. Away, we're bound away, across the wide
Most settlers were farmers, homesteaders on the public land of the Western Territories, and their lives, too, were told in song.
I am looking rather seedy now while holding down my claim, and my victuals are not always served the best. And the mice play shyly round me as I nestle down to rest in the little old sod shanty on my claim, where the hinges are of leather and the windows have no glass, and the board roof lets the howling blizzard in. And I hear the hungry coyote as he slinks up through the grass round the little old sod shanty on my claim.
The journey west was beset with hardships, and the most feared was an Indian attack.
I'll sing you a song and it'll be a sad one, of the trials and troubles and how they begun. We left our dear kindred, our friends and our homes, and crossed the wide districts and mountains to roam. We heard the Sioux Indians all out on the plain, out killing poor drivers and burning their trains, killing poor drivers with arrows and bows. When captured by Indians, no mercy they'd show.
The Indians, valiantly striving to save their land from the inexorable advance of farmers, railroaders, and gold-hungry prospectors, also sang of the struggle. The discovery of gold in California in 1849 sealed the Indians' fate, and it brought streams of hopeful miners in an often illusory search for wealth.
I'm old Tom Moore from the bomber shore in the good old golden days. They call me a bomber and a gin sot too, but what care I for praise? I wander round from town to town just like a roving sign, and the people all say, there goes Tom Moore from the days of '49. In the days of old, in the days of gold, how often I repine for the days of old when we dug up gold in the days of '49.
The annexation of Texas in 1845 added many songs to the American legend.
I made up my mind in early life to leave my girl who was so gay, to dwell in Texas no longer for a while, but to travel west for a many a mile. It was in the year of '83 when J.H. Vincent hired me. He says, young man, I want you to go and follow my herd into Mexico.
Early in the 19th century, the United States began to absorb waves of immigration from various parts of the world. The Irish and Germans who came in greatest numbers felt the sting of discrimination and were often excluded from work in the increasingly industrialized Northeast.
I'm a decent boy just landed from the town of Ballybad, and I want a situation, yes, and I want it very bad. I seen employment advertised, it's just the thing, says I, but the dirty spalpeen ended with no Irish need apply.
As the Western Territories were settled, they became a battleground between Southern planters who wanted to extend slavery westward and their Northern opponents. John Brown led 4 years of anti-slavery guerrilla warfare and was finally hanged.
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes on.
A slave song tells of the time when families were torn apart and human beings were sold like bales of cotton.
Oh, my mother done gone on, tain't but me one, and then my members done gone on, tain't but me one, and then my father done gone on, tain't but me one. Hey, 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 my Lord, tain't but me one. Oh, my Lord, tain't but me one. Oh, my Lord.
In 1861, Julia Ward Howe, abolitionist and feminist, wrote a poem to the tune of John Brown's Body. In the Civil War, it became the marching song of Union troops.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
But the folk version sung by frontline soldiers had a different theme.
Old Abe, he's in the White House, he's a-taking of us new. Old Grant, he's a-busting his gut with the booze. We're out a-wading snow and we ain't got no shoes. We'll keep a-marching on.
The Confederate marching song was written by Dan Emmett, a Northern composer.
I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland.
With this song, blacks throughout the South celebrated emancipation. The years following the Civil War were times of great change and upheaval. Increasingly squeezed by encroaching industry, Southern and Western farmers began a populist movement for the rights of the farmer.
When the farmer comes to town with his wagon broken down, oh, the farmer, he's the man that feeds them all. If you'll only look and see, I think you will agree that the farmer is the man that feeds them all. The farmer is the man, the farmer is the man. He lives on credit till the fall. Then they take him by the hand and they lead him from the land, and the middleman's a man who gets it all.
The late 19th century was also a time when industrial workers began to organize for better conditions. But the union movement did not become a singing movement until the advent of the industrial workers of the world in the early 1900s.
Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the union makes us strong.
When the union's inspiration through the workers.
The songs that came out of the Spanish-American War, which gave the United States its first seats of empire overseas, lacked the expansionist fervor that some leaders were expressing.
McKinley called for volunteers, and then I got my gun. First Spaniard I saw coming, I dropped my gun and run. It was all about that battleship of Maine, at war with that great nation Spain. When I get back to Spain, I'm gonna honor my name. It was all about that battleship of Maine.
President McKinley's assassination in 1901 inspired a surprisingly exuberant country song.
Kinley, Holland, Kinley, Squaw, Docks in McKinley. taking his rest. He's gone, long old time.
World War I produced some stirring patriotic songs and some less than enthusiastic folk songs.
In 1917, we helped them win their fight. But all we got was a lesson in what Sherman said was right in that war, that crazy war. I was a simple country lad, I lived down on the farm. I never even killed a gnat nor done a body harm until that war, that crazy war. I run all over Europe trying to save my life. If there ever comes another war, I'll send my darling wife to that war, that crazy war.
The decade after the war brought affluence for some and prohibition for everybody. Back in the hills, moonshining became a way of life.
Prohibition is a failure most anyone can see, for whiskey sold in every town in the good old USA. Oh, the policeman will arrest you, he'll lock you up in jail, he'll drink up all your liquor and turn you out on bail.
Prohibition didn't last long, and neither did prosperity. When the Great Depression came, the rural farmers and urban poor were hardest hit.
Oh, there once was a time when everything was cheap, but now prices nearly puts a man to sleep. When we pay our grocery bill, we just feel like making our will. Tell me, how can a poor man stand such times and live?
Some looked to heaven for salvation.
For fear the hearts of men are failing, for these are latter days we know. The Great Depression now is spreading, God's word declared it would be so. I'm going where there's no depression, to the lovely land that's free from care. I'll leave this world of toil and trouble. My home's in heaven, I'm going there.
Others, like coal miners, turned to organizing and protest.
My father was a miner, and I'm a miner's son, and I'll stick to the Union till every battle's won. Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
They were joined by workers on the assembly lines.
The Union is behind us, we shall not be moved. The Union is behind us, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved.
And in the textile mills.
I've worked in the cotton mill all my life. I ain't got nothing but a Barlow knife. It's hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere. It's hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times, cotton mill girls are hard times, cotton mill girls, hard times everywhere.
By the beginning of World War II, a significant number of American workers belonged to unions, and they turned their efforts to the nation's defense. Woody Guthrie, a young sailor in the Merchant Marine, who had sung for unions all over the country, wrote this song.
Have you heard of a ship called the Good Reuben James? Manned by hard-fighting men, both of honor and fame. She flew the stars and stripes of this land of the free. Tonight she's in her grave on the bottom of the sea. Tell me, what was their names? Tell me, what what was their names? You have a friend on that good Ruth and James.
After he returned from the war, Woody joined a group of singers that included, among many others, a young banjo player named Pete Seeger. Meeting in New York City, they shared a common interest in topical songs and traditional folk music. It was the beginning of a nationwide response to topical folk music among city people.
You've got to go down and join the union. You've got to join by yourself. Ain't nobody here can join it for you. You've got to go down and join the union by yourself. Sisters got to go down.
Because they sang for labor unions and left-wing causes, many such singers came under attack from Senator Joseph McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities Committee in the early 1950s. But witch hunting and blacklisting did not prevent the growth of the folk song revival, nor the writing of topical songs. The Weavers were the first folk-oriented group to become nationally popular. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, combating racial discrimination throughout the country, was a singing movement. Old folk songs and hymns were given new words and sung in the streets during marches, demonstrations, and boycotts. Songs were also part of the anti-war movement that challenged American involvement in Vietnam.
If you love your Uncle Sam, bring him home, bring him home. Support our boys in Vietnam, bring him home, bring him home. We may be right and we may be wrong, bring him home, bring him home. But we got a right to sing this song, bring him home, bring him home.
Songs have played an important part in the struggle of Spanish-speaking farm workers for a better life. Today, American women are discovering their unwritten history in traditional folk songs.
Oh, hard is the fortune of all womankind. She's always controlled, she's always confined, controlled by her parents until she's a wife, then a slave to her husband the rest of her life.
While they create new songs for the present and future.
Now the love of a man is a beautiful thing, a joy and a comfort so fine. But if the loving you crave just makes you a slave, you're selling yourself down the line. Each person must have their own work to do, each life its own special plan. And a woman is lost who pays the great cost to be standing behind some man.
Folk singers have been in the forefront of the movement to preserve our land from the ravages of thoughtless expansion and exploitation.
When I was a child, my family would travel down to western Kentucky, where my parents were born. And there's a backwards old town that's often remembered so many times that my memories are worn. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay? Well, I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking.
Mr. Peabody's coal train is hauled it away. Then the coal company came with the world's largest shovel, and they tortured the timber and stripped all the land. Well, they dug for their coal till the land was forsaken. Then they wrote it all down as the progress of man. And Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down by the Green River where paradise lay?
Young Native Americans, combining traditional music with contemporary realities, have created one of the oldest and one of the newest songs of American history. In an age of dislocation and change, folk songs give us a sense of our roots and help us to face the future.
You know it's darkest before the dawn. This thought keeps me moving on. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early morning. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early morning. Some say that mankind won't long endure, but what makes them feel so doggone sure? I know that you who hear my singing could make those freedom bells go ringing. I know that you who hear my singing could make those freedom bells go ringing. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early morning. If we could heed these early warnings, the time is now, quite early.